The evening light outside the academy windows always felt a bit magical, especially to the young girl who sat quietly on the wooden bench near the entrance. She came here every day after school, waiting for her mother to finish her cleaning shift. She never complained, never asked to leave early, never acted restless. Instead, she watched. She listened. And she dreamed silently inside her own little world. Her mother worked hard, often moving quickly through the empty corridors to wipe floors, polish glass, or carry buckets of water. The girl followed her sometimes, but most days she stayed in her usual place near the long hallway that led to the practice rooms. That hallway was where she first learned to love music, even though she had never touched a single instrument. Every day, different students passed by carrying sheet music or instrument cases. Some held violins close to their chest. Some hummed warm-up notes as they hurried into the rooms. A few walked confidently, as if the whole place belonged to them. They never looked at her for more than a second. To them, she was simply the cleaner's daughter, someone who blended into the background like a piece of furniture, but she didn't mind. She wasn't here to be seen. She was here to listen. When the doors of the practice rooms opened, even for a moment, melodies slipped out like small secrets. Some notes were soft and gentle. Others were loud and bold. Sometimes she heard the same song played again and again, each time growing better. She memorized them without meaning to. Her mind held on to those sounds the way the sea holds on to waves. There was one practice room she loved more than the others. It was room number 4, the one with the grand piano. She could always tell when someone was playing it, because the sound carried down the hallway and wrapped around her heart like something warm. She never saw the inside of the room for more than a second, only when someone opened the door to enter or leave. But that was enough to show her a glimpse of the shiny black piano with its smooth curves and golden pedals. She imagined what it would feel like to sit in front of it, to lift the fallboard, to rest her fingers on those white keys that looked like pieces of moonlight. She sometimes stretched her own fingers and wondered how they would move. She wondered if the piano would accept her touch or reject it the way the world often rejected people who didn't belong, but she never dared to step inside. She knew the rules. She wasn't a student. She wasn't part of the academy. She didn't have the right. One quiet afternoon, the sound of sweeping echoed softly as her mother passed her. "I'll be done soon," her mother whispered, trying not to disturb the silence of the building. "Stay here, all right?" The girl nodded as always. She never made trouble. She never demanded anything. She only sat and listened. But that day felt different. The academy was strangely empty. Most of the students had already left after their rehearsals. A few teachers walked toward the exit, speaking softly about deadlines and performances. The visiting artists who were supposed to hold an evening session had not yet arrived. For once, the hallway was calm and still. She stood up slowly and walked down the long corridor. Her steps were light, as if she didn't want to disturb the peaceful air around her. She passed room number 1, then room number 2, then 3. When she reached room 4, she felt her heart beat a little faster. The door was slightly open, not wide open, just enough that a sliver of light fell onto the floor. Maybe someone had left in a hurry. Maybe they forgot to close it properly. She looked around. No one was nearby. No footsteps, no voices, no teachers checking rooms. For a long moment, she stood completely still. She knew she should ignore it and walk back. She knew she wasn't supposed to be near the instruments. But something inside her pulled her forward, like a soft whisper saying, "Just take one step." And she did. She moved closer to the door, careful not to make a sound. When she peered inside, her breath caught. The grand piano was sitting there, alone, glowing slightly under the warm yellow lights. It looked bigger than she remembered, more beautiful. almost unreal. She lifted her eyes slowly to the quiet room around it. There were no bags, no sheet music, no signs of anyone returning soon. It was just the piano and the stillness that made the moment feel special. She placed her hand on the door and pushed very gently. It didn't creak. It didn't resist. It opened just enough for her to slip inside. Her feet felt heavy and light at the same time as she walked toward the piano. Her heart thudded softly, as if warning her to stop. But she couldn't stop. Not now. When she reached the bench, she didn't sit right away. She stared at the keys from a small distance, as if they were a treasure she wasn't sure she deserved to touch. She lifted her hand and held it above the keys without touching them. Her fingers trembled a little. The room remained silent, waiting for her to make a choice. She thought about all the times she had heard melodies coming from this very piano. All the times she had closed her eyes and pretended she was the one playing. All the moments she had dreamed quietly, while the rest of the world walked past her. Finally, she took a slow breath and let one fingertip fall onto a single key. A soft note filled the room out. It was small, but to her, it felt like the beginning of something she had been waiting for her entire life. Her eyes widened as the note echoed gently against the walls. She pulled her hand back quickly, like she had touched something too hot. Her heart raced. She looked toward the doorway again, expecting her mother to appear, or a teacher to shout, or a guard to come rushing in. But no one came. She lowered her hand again, this time with less fear. She pressed another key, then another. The sounds blended gently, clumsy but full of feeling. Without realizing it, she sat down slowly on the piano bench. Her hands rested above the keys. She didn't know if she was allowed to be here, but she knew she had always wanted this, and for the first time in her life, she decided to follow her heart instead of the rules. She closed her eyes and tried to remember the melodies she had heard through the hallway. One by one, the notes returned to her mind. She began playing them softly, uncertain at first, then with growing confidence. Her hands moved the way she had imagined they would in her daydreams. The music wasn't perfect, but it was alive. It felt like her own voice speaking for the first time. She didn't know who might hear her. She didn't know what would happen if someone caught her. She didn't know if this moment was a mistake, but it didn't matter, because the music, flowing from her fingertips, felt like a truth she had kept hidden for too long. And in that empty room, with only the grand piano to witness it, she let herself belong to something beautiful, even if only for a moment. The moment her fingers touched the keys again, a soft shiver ran through her body. She didn't understand why it felt that way, only that it felt right. The piano responded gently, almost as if it had been waiting for someone like her to bring it to life in a new way. She pressed another key, then another, and the sounds blended into a small melody. She remembered from the hallway. She wasn't thinking about getting caught anymore. She wasn't thinking about rules or fear or the idea that she didn't belong here. The only thing that existed for her now was the quiet room, the warm lights above, and the beautiful instrument in front of her dot. Her fingers were not trained. They moved with hesitations, sometimes too fast, sometimes too slow. But the emotion behind each touch made the music feel real, not practiced. She closed her eyes to follow the memory of the song she had heard so many times, played by students who probably never imagined someone like her was listening dot at first. She played softly, worried the sound might travel too far. But as she continued, something inside her grew braver. Her notes became clearer, fuller. She didn't know the exact order of the keys. She didn't know the proper technique. But she knew the feeling of the melody, and that feeling guided her hands better than any lesson could. Slowly, the room filled with the sound of her small yet honest attempt at playing. The piano's voice rose and wrapped around her like a warm blanket. She didn't notice how much time was passing. She didn't think about anything except the music, but the walls of the academy had a way of carrying sound farther than she expected. Dot at the far end of the hallway. A student was walking back to fetch the scarf she'd forgotten in one of the rooms. She was moving quickly, planning to grab it and leave before the evening session began. But halfway down the hallway, she froze. Someone was playing Dot at first. She thought it was a teacher or one of the advanced students warming up. But something about the playing was different. It wasn't polished. It wasn't stiff or disciplined. It was soft, emotional, almost hesitant, but deeply alive. She had never heard anyone play the Academy's pieces with that kind of raw feeling. She turned her head toward the direction of the sound. It was coming from room 4. Curiosity pulled her forward. She walked quietly, trying not to disturb the surprising moment unfolding ahead. As she reached the half-open door, she leaned slightly to peek inside. Her eyes widened. Dot, it wasn't a student. It wasn't a teacher. It wasn't anyone she recognized as part of the Academy. Dot, it was the cleaner's daughter, the same girl she had seen waiting in the hallway day after day, sitting alone, quietly observing everyone else. She had never seen the girl talk much, never seen her interact with anyone, never seen her touch an instrument. Yet here she was, playing the grand piano with a look of pure concentration on her small face. The student didn't know what to do. For a second, she considered stepping inside and asking what was going on. But something stopped her. The expression on the girl's face, the softness in her hands, the fragile beauty of the moment. It didn't feel right to interrupt. So she stayed where she was, watching silently. Dot as the music continued. Another person walked by, a teacher, carrying a stack of papers. He stopped as well. His eyebrows lifted with surprise. He looked at the student watching from the doorway, then peeked inside himself. He didn't move either. The girl inside the room had no idea she had an audience. She was lost in the melody, completely unaware that the world outside had begun to take notice of her. Dot. Her fingers slipped at one point, hitting the wrong key. She winced, embarrassed even while alone, then tried again. The teacher watching her noticed that small reaction. It wasn't the reaction of someone playing carelessly. It was the reaction of someone who cared deeply about the music. More footsteps echoed down the hallway. A pair of visiting artists, 2 musicians who had come to prepare for their evening performance, were passing through. They, too, heard the unusual sound coming from room 4. One of them slowed down. "Who's practicing at this hour?" he murmured. The other shrugged, but followed the sound anyway. Soon they reached the doorway, and like the others, they grew still. None of them spoke. None of them dared to break the moment. Inside, the girl continued playing a piece she had built from memory, mixing parts of songs she had heard throughout the week. It wasn't perfect, but it was full of heart. She wasn't aware that 4 people now stood outside the room, listening to her with looks of disbelief and growing curiosity. Her hands moved faster now, as though something inside her had broken free. She felt the music rushing through her like a quiet fire. She didn't know how to explain it. It just felt like everything she had held inside her, every dream, every silent wish, every moment she had watched others play, was finally finding a way out. Then something changed. Her mother's soft footsteps echoed faintly in the hallway. She was coming closer, carrying a cleaning cloth and humming a tune to herself. She didn't know anything unusual was happening. She didn't know her daughter was inside the room that she had always warned her not to enter. The teacher noticed her approaching. He stepped away from the doorway, unsure of how the mother might react. The student stepped back too, biting her lip nervously. The girl inside the room was still playing, completely unaware. Her mother finally reached the doorway and looked inside, and the cloth in her hand fell to the floor. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She stared at her daughter sitting at the grand piano, playing it with a level of comfort and passion she had never seen before. She didn't know whether to be proud, shocked, or terrified. Her first instinct was to step inside and pull her daughter away before she got in trouble. But when she took one step forward, she suddenly noticed the crowd behind her, the teacher, the student, the visiting artists all standing silently, watching the girl with expressions of awe. Her mother stopped. The girl finally reached the end of her improvised melody, letting the last soft note fade into the quiet air. Her heart felt calm, warm, peaceful. She lifted her hands slowly from the keys and rested them on her lap. Only then did she turn her head and freeze. There were people in the doorway. She felt her face grow warm, her chest tighten. Had she done something wrong? Were they angry? Was her mother upset? Would she get in trouble? Would her mother lose her job? The fear came rushing back, stronger than before. She stood up quickly, stepping away from the bench. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice shaky. "I didn't mean to. The door was open, and the teacher raised a hand gently, stopping her panic. "How long have you been playing?" he asked softly. She looked at him, confused. I don't play. I just listen." The visiting artist stepped forward, his eyes filled with curiosity. "You've never learned?" She shook her head. The student in the doorway was still speechless. Her mother took a hesitant step inside, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. She didn't mean to cause trouble. "I'll make sure." But one of the visiting artists interrupted kindly. "This isn't trouble." He turned back to the girl. "Can you play something else?" Her eyes widened. "Me?" "Yes," he said. "Only if you want to." The girl looked at her mother. Her mother looked back at her, torn between fear and the growing realization that something extraordinary was happening, right in front of her dot after a long moment. Her mother gave a tiny nod. The girl's heart fluttered. She slowly sat back down on the bench, her hands trembling. The room had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It wasn't peaceful. Now it was filled with people waiting, watching. She closed her eyes again, took a slow breath, and let her fingers press the keys. The music rose for the second time that evening dot, and this time she wasn't playing alone. The moment she began playing again, the room felt different. This time she could feel the weight of the eyes watching her. The quiet safety she had felt before was gone, replaced with a nervous energy that made her hands tremble. She had never played in front of anyone before, not even her mother. She didn't know how to perform. She didn't know how to show confidence. She only knew how to feel the music. She pressed the first few keys slowly. The notes came out thinner than she expected. Her heart beat too fast, and for a second, she thought she might stop altogether. But then she remembered the sound she loved so much, the melodies she had held inside her for so long. She took a small breath and tried again. This time, the piano responded with warmer notes. Her fingers continued moving, shaky at first, then steadier. She tried to imagine she was alone again, sitting quietly in the empty room, lost in the sound of the keys. She didn't lift her head. She didn't look at the people around her. She just let the music guide her dot. The visiting artists stood still, watching with deep curiosity. One of them crossed his arms slowly, trying to understand how a child with no training could create such feeling through an instrument most adults struggled to master. The other leaned slightly forward, listening intently as if each note held a secret. The teacher who had first stopped near the doorway followed every movement of her hands. He had spent years teaching technique, discipline, timing, yet this girl had none of those things, and still, the music she created felt more honest than many polished performances, He had heard Dot. Her mother stood near the door, hands pressed together tightly. She didn't dare breathe too loudly, afraid of interrupting her daughter's fragile courage. Pride and worry mixed inside her chest, leaving her unsure whether she was witnessing a dream or the beginning of trouble. The girl shifted into another melody she remembered. It wasn't played correctly. She missed several notes, changed some by accident, and sometimes hesitated too long between them. But somehow, her mistakes didn't ruin the moment. They made the music feel real, full of emotion that no technical training could replicate. Dot as she played. More footsteps approached the room. People passing the hallway slowed down when they heard the sound. They didn't know who was inside, but the music was gentle and unusual enough to catch their attention. One by one, a few students and a staff member quietly joined the small crowd. Before long, the once empty hallway had a small group of listeners standing outside the door, each person wearing a mixture of surprise and curiosity. Inside, the girl still had no idea that more people had arrived. Her world was only the piano, only the warm keys beneath her fingers, and the soft notes rising from them. Dot, at one point, she shifted into a melody she had never heard before. She wasn't copying anything this time. She was creating. Her fingers moved in patterns that simply felt right to her, building a tune she didn't understand, but felt deeply. It was simple, but it carried a soft sadness that made the room feel even quieter. One of the visiting artists whispered to the teacher, "She plays like she's telling a story." The teacher nodded slowly. A story she never learned, but somehow already knows. Her mother wiped her eyes gently, not wanting anyone to notice her tears. She had always known her daughter was special, but she had never imagined something like this. The girl continued until she reached a point where the melody naturally came to an end. The last note lingered in the air, hanging like a delicate thread. She let her hands fall softly to her lap. The room felt still, almost breathless. She didn't turn around right away. She was afraid of what she would see, afraid that her playing wasn't good enough, afraid she had caused trouble, afraid her mother would be upset. When she finally looked over her shoulder, she saw more people than before. Not just the teacher and the girl from earlier, but several others standing quietly in the doorway. Her breath caught in her throat. Dot, her mother, stepped forward carefully, her voice soft. "It's all right," she said, trying to calm her daughter's nerves. One of the visiting artists stepped closer to the piano. "What you just played? Where did you learn it?" The girl swallowed hard. "I didn't learn it. I just remember sounds. And sometimes I make up notes that feel right." The other visiting artist exchanged a thoughtful look with him. "Do you come here often?" he asked her. She nodded shyly. "I wait for my mother. She works here." A student near the back whispered to another, "I didn't know she could play." The teacher stepped inside the room slowly. "Would you mind," he said gently, "playing something you've heard in the hallway before?" She hesitated. "Right now?" "Only if you want to," he replied. She looked down at the piano again. Her nerves tightened, but she took another small breath and placed her hands back on the keys. This time, she tried to recall a piece she heard many times, a soft classical tune that one of the advanced students practiced for months. She remembered the rise and fall of the melody, the way the notes flowed like water. Dot. She pressed the keys gently, trying to match the memory in her mind. Her version was not exact, but it carried the spirit of the piece. She played it slowly, letting her fingers figure out the path one note at a time. The teacher's eyes widened slightly. "She's playing by ear," he murmured, "almost perfectly for someone who has never touched a piano before today." The visiting artists watched with growing astonishment. "This isn't normal," one whispered. "This kind of natural memory. It's rare." Her mother looked between the adults, unsure whether their reactions were good or bad. She didn't understand much about music, but she could see their faces changing as they listened. The girl reached the end of the piece again, her last note soft and gentle. This time, when she lifted her hands, the room stayed silent, not because no one knew what to say, but because everyone was still processing what they had just witnessed. The teacher finally spoke, his voice calm and kind. "Have you ever wanted to learn for real?" The girl hesitated. She had dreamed of it every day, but had never dared to say it out loud. I don't know," she whispered. "I don't think I'm allowed." One of the visiting artists shook his head. "Talent like this shouldn't be ignored," he said. "She has something rare." The other nodded. "And she should be encouraged, not kept away from it." Her mother stepped forward, worry tight in her voice. "She wasn't supposed to touch anything. Please, don't be upset with her." "I should have watched more closely." "No one is upset," the teacher assured her gently. "We're surprised and impressed." Her mother still looked unsure. She was used to being blamed for things, and fear made it hard for her to accept praise. The visiting artists exchanged another look. Then one of them asked, "Would you come back tomorrow at the same time?" "We would like to hear her again." Her mother's eyes widened. "Come back? You mean you want to hear her play again?" "Yes," he replied. "If that's all right with you?" The girl felt her heart race. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. They wanted her to come back? They actually wanted to hear her? Her mother looked down at her, unsure what to say. She didn't want her daughter to get her hopes up, but she also didn't want to stand in the way of something that might be special. After a long pause, she nodded softly. "We can come." The girl felt something warm and bright bloom inside her chest. For the first time in her life, someone had invited her to play, not by accident, not by mistake, but because they truly wanted to hear her dot as the small crowd began to leave the doorway. The visiting artists stayed behind for a moment longer. "We'll be back early tomorrow," one of them said. "Don't be afraid. Just play the way you feel." She nodded quietly. Her mother gently touched her shoulder. "Let's go," she whispered. "It's getting late." The girl stood up from the piano bench, her legs shaky. She cast one last glance at the grand piano before following her mother out of the room. The hallway felt different now. It didn't feel like a place she simply passed through. It felt like a place that had finally seen her. And as she walked beside her mother, she couldn't stop wondering what tomorrow would bring. The next morning, the girl woke up earlier than usual. She had hardly slept, tossing and turning in her small bed, imagining the piano, imagining the notes, imagining the faces of the people who had listened to her the night before. Her heart was both nervous and excited. She had never performed for anyone outside her mother before, and now several people had asked to hear her again. Not her mother noticed her pacing in the room. "You don't need to be nervous," she said gently. "Just play the way you did yesterday." The girl nodded, though her stomach fluttered with anxiety. I hope I can do it again," she whispered. Her mother smiled softly. "You will. You just have to trust yourself." They walked together to the academy. The early morning light made the hallways glow. As they passed through the familiar corridors, the girl noticed the little things she had never really seen before: the polished floors, the colorful posters of past performances, the shadows that shifted with the rising sun. Everything seemed alive, and she felt like she belonged in a way she never had before. When they reached room 4, the door was already open. The visiting artists were there, waiting patiently. They smiled warmly when they saw her and waved her forward. "Good morning," one said. "Are you ready to play?" She nodded quietly, feeling her hands clam up with nervous energy. "Don't worry about making mistakes," the other artist added. "Just play the way you feel." Her mother gave her a reassuring pat on the shoulder and then stepped back, giving her space. She sat on the piano bench, her hands hovering above the keys. The room felt smaller and larger at the same time. It was intimate, yet filled with the weight of the people watching her. She took a deep breath and pressed a single key. The note rang out clearly, and she felt a small wave of relief. She could do this. Slowly, she started playing. At first, her fingers stumbled over the keys, hesitant. But then she remembered the melodies she had learned by listening from the hallway. She played each note with care, letting the emotion guide her movements. The music flowed through her, connecting her to the memories she had held inside for years. The visiting artists listened closely, leaning in as if trying to catch every detail. They were amazed at her ability to reproduce melodies from memory so accurately, and yet infuse them with her own feeling. It was instinct, not training, but it was powerful. Her mother watched from the doorway, quietly holding back tears. She had always known her daughter was special, but seeing it so clearly for the first time made her heart swell with pride. She also felt a little fear of what the future might hold, fear of judgment, but she pushed it aside, letting the moment shine. As the girl continued, the melody shifted. She moved into a piece she had never played before, creating her own music from the feelings inside her. Her fingers danced over the keys with a rhythm and flow that felt effortless. She had no idea that she was drawing the attention of everyone in the room, that each note seemed to captivate the listeners. The visiting artists whispered to each other quietly. "She doesn't just play, she creates." "Yes," the other replied. It's rare to see someone with both memory and instinct so naturally intertwined. Time passed without anyone speaking. The girl didn't notice how long she had been playing. She didn't notice the teacher standing nearby, silently observing, nor the small crowd gathering outside the doorway. She was entirely absorbed in the sound she was creating. When she finally finished, she let her hands rest on her lap and exhaled slowly. The room was quiet for a moment, as if everyone was holding their breath, afraid to break the magic that had just happened. One of the visiting artists stepped forward first. "That was extraordinary," he said softly. "Do you understand what you just did?" The girl shook her head. I just played what I felt." The teacher smiled, stepping closer. "And that is exactly why it was so beautiful. Talent like yours is rare. You have a gift, and it deserves guidance." Her mother's eyes widened. "Guidance?" she asked cautiously. "What do you mean?" The artist gestured to the piano. "She should be learning, formally, with a teacher who can help her grow. She has something most people spend years trying to find." The girl felt her heart pound in her chest. She had dreamed of this, yes, but never imagined anyone would actually see her the way these artists and teachers were seeing her. She felt a mixture of joy, fear, and disbelief. The teacher nodded toward the girl. "We can help her. If you agree, we can arrange lessons, a proper place for her to practice, and opportunities to perform. She should not be hidden away." Her mother hesitated. She wanted to protect her daughter. She wanted her to be safe. But she also understood that this was an opportunity she could never have imagined. She looked at her daughter, whose eyes shone with hope and curiosity, and realized that she couldn't say no. "All right," she said softly. "We'll do it. But I want her to be happy and safe." "You will have both," the artist assured her. "We'll guide her, step by step." The girl felt a warm glow in her chest. She had never been asked to pursue a dream before, never been told her abilities were something to nurture. The idea that she could learn, grow, and play with guidance made her feel light, like she could float above the floor. The teacher clapped his hands lightly. "Tomorrow, we'll start with some lessons and see how she progresses. For now, practice is enough. And don't worry, we'll be patient." Her mother smiled, relief washing over her. "Thank you," she said, feeling a strange mixture of gratitude and pride. The visiting artist stepped back, and exchanged one last look. "We'll be back tomorrow, early," one said. "We want to see what she can do after a day of rest and thought." The girl nodded, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. As they left the room together, she glanced back at the piano. It had never looked more beautiful to her. The polished black surface, the golden pedals, the way the keys reflected the morning light, it all felt like a promise of a new beginning. Her mother took her hand, holding it gently. "You did something amazing," she said. "Never forget that." The girl squeezed her mother's hand back. "I'll try," she whispered. Walking down the hallway, she felt a sense of possibility she had never felt before. For the first time, she wasn't just the cleaner's daughter. She was a girl who could play, who could create, who could be seen and appreciated for her talent. And that thought filled her with a quiet determination. She would come back tomorrow. She would play again. She would show them that the music inside her was not a mistake, not a coincidence, but a gift waiting to be shared. The next day, the girl woke up with her heart pounding. Today was the day she would return to the piano with the visiting artists waiting. She felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness she had never known before. Her mother noticed her pacing in the room and gently said, "Remember, just play from your heart. Nothing else matters." She nodded, her small hands clenching nervously. They walked together to the academy, the early morning sunlight spilling through the hallways, making them feel almost magical. She felt as if the building itself was welcoming her back. When they arrived at room 4, the visiting artists were already there, waiting patiently. They smiled warmly when they saw her, their eyes filled with encouragement. The girl took a deep breath and approached the piano, feeling the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. She sat on the bench, her hands hovering above the keys. The first note she played was soft, almost shy, but it felt right. Her fingers trembled slightly as she moved to the next key, and then the next. Slowly, the melody began to flow, soft at first and then stronger. She was no longer just repeating songs she had memorized from the hallway. She was creating her own music, letting her emotions guide her fingers. The visiting artists leaned in, watching every movement with amazement. One whispered to the other, "She isn't just playing. She's expressing herself." The teacher stood quietly at the side of the room, nodding with approval. He had never seen a child play with such natural talent, such instinctive understanding of the instrument. Her music carried emotion that no lesson or training could teach. Her mother stood near the doorway, trying to contain her pride and worry at the same time. She wanted to protect her daughter, but she also knew that what was happening was extraordinary. Tears threatened to spill from her eyes, but she held them back, letting her daughter shine without interruption. The girl's fingers danced over the keys, moving faster now, more confidently. She felt the music flowing through her, as if it had always been a part of her. She didn't notice the small audience forming outside the room. Students, staff, and even a few latecomers stopped to listen. Everyone was captivated by the sound she created. She played a melody that rose and fell like waves, soft and strong, happy and sad all at once. Her hands moved as if guided by something beyond herself, and the music filled the room completely. The piano seemed to sing with her, responding to every emotion she poured into it. When she reached the end of the piece, she didn't stop immediately. She lingered on the last note, letting it resonate through the room, and then gently rested her hands on her lap. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of awe and admiration. The teacher stepped forward first. "You have something very rare," he said gently. "Talent like this is not often seen. Have you ever considered learning properly with a teacher?" The girl shook her head softly. I never thought I could." The visiting artist smiled. "You can, and you will. With proper guidance, you could be extraordinary." Her mother's eyes widened. Extraordinary? She whispered. Yes, the teacher said. She has a gift that needs nurturing. We want to help her, to give her the tools to grow, to play and perform at her fullest potential. The girl felt her heart swell. She had always dreamed of playing the piano, but never imagined anyone would recognize her talent, let alone offer to help her grow. She felt a warmth inside her, a feeling of being seen and valued for the first time. Would you like to start lessons? The visiting artist asked her gently. She nodded eagerly. Yes, she whispered Dot, and that was the beginning of a new journey. The girl, once known only as the cleaner's daughter, was now a student with a future filled with music. She began regular lessons with the teachers at the academy, practicing diligently every day. She learned new techniques, explored new melodies, and discovered more about the piano than she ever imagined possible. Her mother watched with pride as her daughter grew more confident. The fear that had once shadowed her heart was replaced with hope and excitement. She supported her in every way she could, helping her manage practice schedules, bringing her to lessons, and celebrating every small victory. The visiting artists continued to mentor her whenever they visited, offering guidance and encouragement. She learned to play more complex pieces, to express emotion through her music, and to perform in front of others. Each time she played, she became more sure of herself, more comfortable with the piano as an extension of her own voice. Word of her talent began to spread throughout the academy. Students who had once overlooked her now approached her with respect and admiration. She was no longer just the daughter of the cleaner. She was a musician in her own right, capable of captivating anyone who listened. The girl never forgot the moment she first touched the piano, the first time she allowed herself to play in the empty room. That memory stayed with her, a reminder of the courage it took to step forward, to follow her heart, and to trust in her own abilities. As the days turned into weeks and months, she continued to grow. She performed at small recitals, gradually gaining confidence to play in front of larger audiences. Each performance brought new experiences, new lessons, and new opportunities. Her journey was not without challenges. There were times when she struggled to master a difficult piece or felt discouraged by mistakes. But she had learned resilience. She had learned that the music inside her was stronger than fear, stronger than doubt, and that with dedication and support, she could achieve remarkable things. Her mother remained by her side, always supportive, always encouraging. Together, they shared the joy of each accomplishment and the lessons of each setback. The bond between them grew stronger, rooted in love, trust, and the shared experience of discovering something extraordinary. One evening, after a long day of practice, the girl sat at the piano alone. She closed her eyes and let her fingers wander over the keys, playing a melody that came from her heart. The music was soft, tender, and full of emotion. It was a reflection of her journey, of her dreams, and of the courage that had brought her here. As she played, she realized how far she had come. From sitting quietly in the hallway, listening to the sounds of the academy, to standing before the piano with an audience of teachers and artists watching her every move. She had grown in ways she never imagined, and she knew this was only the beginning. The piano, once a forbidden treasure, was now her companion, her voice, and her future. She had discovered her gift, and with guidance, determination, and heart, she would continue to share it with the world. The story of the cleaner's daughter, who had struck the piano and captured the hearts of all who heard her, was no longer a quiet secret. It was a tale of courage, talent, and the extraordinary power of believing in oneself. And as she played that evening, she knew that her journey had only just begun, with endless possibilities stretching out before her, one note at a time.